These are the 10 biggest struggles I had when I was learning Spanish. Number one is that I would get frustrated. So I'm a very curious person, and when I first started learning Spanish, I would get frustrated because I was so curious. I was like, man, I need to know what the word bolsa means. I need to know. Okay, and I'm gonna look it up, and I gotta look it up, and I gotta do it right now. And I'll get frustrated. Now, mind you, all of these are lessons that come from the struggles that I had, okay? So what you're seeing here on the board are lessons that you should take away from my 10 years of learning Spanish. So number one is to be curious and get frustrated. Because if you're not curious about the language, then you're not going to learn as quickly, okay? So I remember I would talk to my friend Luis and I would get really frustrated because I couldn't understand what he was saying. He would speak really fast. He would use all this weird slang that I had never heard. But because I was getting frustrated, I would learn from that. And I would say, gosh, okay, Luis, what the heck does that mean? Tell me, help me. And he would say, oh, it's this. And then this is maybe a little bit weird, but I would talk to myself. I would literally learn these things after getting frustrated, and I was being curious, and then I would be in the shower, I'd be on the toilet, I'd be at the dinner table, and I'd be literally talking to myself. Okay, I'm this, and how would I say this? And I would try to have conversations with myself. But that curiosity and that getting frustrated really did help me progress much faster. Next is to ask questions. It's a big thing that I see a lot of students not do enough of. I have a new student, she is absolutely fantastic from the Philippines, and she is amazing at asking me questions, and good questions at that. This is something that helped me a lot. When I first started learning Spanish, I don't think I asked enough questions. But as I progressed, I started to become more confident and I would ask more questions. Now, in comparison to my peers in my high school Spanish classes, oftentimes they wouldn't raise their hands or they would just stay quiet due to fear of embarrassment or looking dumb, but that is a big mistake, okay? Always, always, always ask questions. That is going to help you a lot. And that ties into this idea of be curious. Next is to teach. Now, the thing is, in my high school Spanish classes, many of my peers realized that I was catching on to Spanish and that I found it to be something quite natural. I said, wow, this actually makes sense. I enjoy this. I like this. And because of that, people would come to me and ask me questions. Oftentimes because either the teacher didn't have time for them, they were too embarrassed to ask the teacher or ask other people, ask in front of the entire classroom. So people would come to me, they would say, Nate, I don't understand what's going on with direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns, or I don't understand how to conjugate verbs in the present tense. So I would teach people, okay? So this is when my Spanish really started to take a turn. It was when I started teaching people, I started helping people. Because what ended up happening was I would help people and then I wouldn't know how to do something. Then I would go and ask the teacher and they would help me, and that in turn would solidify my own knowledge. Teaching is going to help you a lot. A struggle I had was being able to understand native Spanish speakers, and I think many of us struggle with this. Even to this day, if I come across someone who has an accent that I'm not used to, or if they speak quite quickly, or they use different slang that I'm not used to, it might be hard for me to understand them. But something that really helped me with this was listening to music. Now, not only is listening to music very helpful for your Spanish, but it's also just a lot of fun. A big mistake I made is that I didn't start listening to music soon enough. I thought, oh, I just show up to my Spanish classes and I learn Spanish. It'll be great. But it's very, very important that you're listening to music. I actually have a playlist of more than 48 hours of music in Spanish, and I'll link to it down in the video description. Another thing is that listening to music helps me hone my accent. A lot of people say that I sound like a Mexican Spanish speaker, and that's because a lot of the music that I listen to and that I used to listen to was from Mexico. Next is to have humility. Now, this is a big struggle that I had, and I think many students face this issue. Oftentimes, when we are learning a language, we have to accept that we are wrong. We have to accept that we're going to make mistakes in front of people. We have to accept that we're going to look silly. But you're never going to improve if you don't have humility. If your ego gets in the way and you're too afraid to speak with people because you think you're going to look dumb or silly or make mistakes, you are massively holding yourself back. You need to have humility. You need to understand, I'm going to make mistakes, I'm a learner, and the people that I'm practicing with understand that I am learning the language and it's okay to make mistakes. We need to have humility. I'll give you an example of this. I've been learning Spanish for the past 10 years, and I've had my website Spanish with Nate for the past 4, almost 5 now. Recently, I had a group call with all of my students, and a student had asked a question about a medical phrase or term. I tried to explain, and I truthfully didn't do a great job. However, one of my advanced students, Jonathan, which he is amazing by the way, and I swear, all of the students in my Spanish courses who are part of our Discord community absolutely love Jonathan. Jonathan and Jackson, you guys are awesome. So anyways, Jonathan goes on and says, hey Nate, I work in the medical field. Let me see if I can explain this in a way that makes more sense to the student. So Jonathan goes on to explain, the student understands it, and I had to have the humility as the teacher to say, right, Jonathan, you did a better job than me, and thank you so much for helping us. Instead of saying, oh, well, okay, whatever, Jonathan, okay, the idea is we need to have humility. Imagine myself, wow, I teach the language I've been learning for the past 10 years, and I have to have humility to make mistakes in these videos, for example, and have native speakers come and say, Nate, that's not necessarily correct, or, you need to improve this. And sometimes that hurts, but we have to try and get rid of the ego and have humility. A very important thing to learn. Next is to find friends. Now, truthfully, there wasn't a big struggle for me, but it is a big struggle for a lot of students. The great thing about friends is that they are free teachers. Now, when I say friends, I mean friends that speak Spanish. Now, maybe they're not a native speaker, maybe they are, doesn't matter, as long as you have friends to practice speaking with. Because the reality is, when I was learning Spanish, I would go to my Spanish classes, it was in high school, I didn't have to pay for these, and I never really took a formal tutoring lesson from anyone because I had Spanish-speaking friends. Now, I've been very fortunate because I grew up in Southern California. We have lots of Latinos there and lots of Spanish speakers. So because of that, it was pretty easy for me to find friends. As you all know, my best buddy, Luis. If you didn't know, Luis and I actually have a podcast called Suave Spanish, which you can check out on Spotify or any streaming platform. If you don't have people to speak Spanish with, you can always go online to a free app like Hello Talk or Tandem. You can go in Discord communities. You could possibly find people within Facebook groups. Okay, so the possibilities are endless. Next is to speak every day. Now, oh my gosh, I really struggled with speaking Spanish when I first started, and I would get frustrated because I would talk to my best buddy Luis, and oftentimes he didn't know how to explain things to me, and that would really, really frustrate me. So, and I wasn't speaking with, a lot of different people. Yeah, I was speaking with different people, but not a lot. And so therefore I wasn't finding, people who were maybe better teachers than Luis or someone else, or who had a different way of explaining things. Not to say that Luis isn't a great teacher, because he is, but this is a big struggle I had with speaking. Now, a lesson you can take away from this is that you need to speak every day. If we look back at my YouTube videos from 4 years ago when I first started, so 2020 is when I started making videos in Spanish, I was making all these Omigo videos, right? Guy speaks perfect Spanish and surprises people. And because of that, my Spanish improved rapidly. I look at those videos from 4 years ago and I cringe and I say, oh man, my Spanish wasn't good. My accent was bad. My use of vocabulary wasn't great. And I can 100% say that the number one reason my Spanish has gotten much better is because I speak every day. In addition to being consistent, something that's going to keep you consistent is having a community. Find yourself a community that is going to motivate you, inspire you, find a group of like-minded people. When I think about going to the gym, for example, going to the gym oftentimes isn't the most fun and exciting thing to do. But if you have a community, if you go to classes at the gym, for example, or you have a personal trainer, well, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more fun and you're much more likely to be consistent. Next is to always be a beginner. Now, I think this is a struggle for any learner because we get to a certain point and we think, my Spanish is great, I don't need to learn anymore, and that is a big mistake. You can always be a beginner. I consider myself a beginner. And unfortunately, many students will send me emails asking me about my Spanish courses and will say, well, Nate, I don't know if this program's gonna be good for me. I have a very advanced level. Maybe I'll hop on a call with the student, I'll talk. And I quickly realized that they do not have an advanced level. Their perception is way off. Finally, you have to live it. Whenever you drive, listen to music in Spanish. Or whenever you're in the kitchen, you only speak Spanish. Or when you watch YouTube, you watch half in English and half in Spanish. The idea here is try to live the language because you can always learn something new. It's a lifelong process and you need to remember, you have to enjoy it and you have to live it. If we look at my life now, 10 years after having started learning the language, I feel like I keep saying 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. But now here I am 10 years later after having started learning. I live in Mexico City. My girlfriend is a native Spanish speaker. My job is teaching Spanish. And so I really live the language. So figure out ways that you can live the language. Bueno, muchas gracias por ver este video. Espero que hayas aprendido algo nuevo. Y no te olvides, si quieres aprender conmigo, puedes. Aquí tengo un free PDF in the video description. Check it out so you'll get access to all of this plus bonus resources that will help you learn faster. Muchas gracias y espero que tengas muy buen día. Hasta luego.